The Department of Defense adopting ethical AI standards. Greg Nichols was ZDNet here to talk a little bit more about this. With this, Greg, thanks for being with me. You know, we've been hearing uh, about the efforts here to put together these ethical standards for AI. So give us a little bit of context here off the top.
Yeah, in late February of this year, Karen, the DoD announced its adoption of these ethical principles for the use and implementation of artificial intelligence, which has been kind of a big hot button issue for sure, one that's raised the eyebrows of a lot of critics and skeptics. So ZDNet has been tracking this process since at least 2018, but the adoption of the ethical principles, they kind of got buried in March when COVID hit the US. So it definitely warrants a bit of a closer look. And to do that, I reached out to Justin Naroda at Booz Hamilton. He's the vice president and leader of Booz Hamilton's analytics and AI business over there. So he's got some really interesting insights. And he provided some context, some insights about the growing adoption of AI in defense, and really the moving target of applying a principled approach to its development and deployment in defense.
And when you talk about or talk about the current role, you know, right now, the current role of AI in defense.
Yeah, sure. You know, artificial intelligence is kind of being applied in a broad set of applications, even right now, even today. And again, that certainly invites a critical eye. A lot of people are very closely watching the implementation of these ethical guidelines. So right now, for example, AI is used in cyber defense. Machine learning, for example, can identify threats. That's one area where it's really been implemented already. It's also being deployed to predict and repair military equipment before it breaks down. And it's being used, in fact, to improve the performance and readiness of soldiers. Now, initially, when this process of adopting or creating guidelines started, AI was focused on what might be called like back office operations, and you know, making the systems that are behind defense more efficient. But there's now an increasing focus on moving AI into the operations field, and the process of getting it out of the lab has been really challenging. Not the least because these guidelines have been evolving, but we're definitely approaching an inflection point. And as Justin points out in our conversation, one key factor in the continued expansion of AI applications in defense is improved development in the automation and standards associated with what are called MLOPs, which is the kind of structured process for development, testing, deployment, and monitoring AI and machine learning solutions. So that's really where a lot of the work is now focused, now that these standards have been kind of codified and adopted as a framework.
And expand a little bit, Greg, on the top, you know, the takeaways there from some of the top adopted standards as of right now.
Yeah, so the DoD's principles for ethical adoption of AI lay out a framework of factors that must be taken into consideration when designing AI solution for defense applications. And they highlight the elements that are critical for keeping ethics at the forefront of implementation here. So there's a few different areas that are sort of areas of focus. The adoption of AI, it has to be done in a way that's equitable and traceable. So this applies to the development of approaches and metrics to measure the level of bias, for example, in the training data that machine learning or an AI application will use, and that's huge. You know, the AI application is only as good as the data behind it, and if there's an implicit bias to that data set, then there's going to be an implicit bias to the way that AI functions, which is you know, really could be catastrophic in a lot of ways. Another area of focus is reliability. So there has to be an ability to measure the level of reliability, and that requires standard metrics, which has to be agreed upon and sort of continuously monitored through development and deployment to ensure that reliability is maintained at an acceptable level. The AI has to be governable. So much like has been implemented in the cybersecurity realm over the last several years, AI needs to have a monitoring capability that proves a level of proficiency. And when it's found to be not proficient, there needs to be some way to revert away from the AI application, whether it's kicking it back to human control or disengaging it altogether, or certainly retraining the AI to become more proficient. So there's still work to be done to build off of these principles, to develop standards to guide development and approval processes, especially when AI solutions are being developed and applied to, what's called higher risk areas in the Department of Defense. No one is kind of directly talking about AI and automated weapons right now in the realm of the Defense Department. It's kind of an area that have warranted skepticism and criticism, but that is definitely the direction everything seems to be moving. So yeah, approval processes are hopefully coming online that will help keep the development and deployment of these systems really kind of above board ethically in a lot of ways.
Yeah, when you talk about, here in this country, in the U.S., about, our stance on AI and defense, how do we stack up or compare to other, nations, how they feel about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the US and Europe have adopted quite similar AI principles, and recently too. This is all happening kind of within the last 6 months, and the US and Europe are very in sync with regards to their approaches to develop and implement AI in a responsible way. The US also recently joined the G7 AI panel for setting ethical guidelines for the use of AI. And this group was formed to guide kind of the responsible adoption of AI based on shared principles of things like human rights, inclusion, diversity, economic growth, areas like that. There are other countries that have taken a more aggressive stance toward AI and how they've implemented it. But as Justin Naroda points out, moving it at a kind of a breakneck speed without taking into account things like how to responsibly do this and roll out AI in the long run is going to result in applications that either don't meet required performance thresholds or have the potential to result in subpar, and I'm editorializing a bit here, or even dangerous implementations of AI, which just needs to be avoided at all costs. Historically, early adopters of new technologies have not necessarily been the most successful, so the stakes are very high here, and a measured approach is certainly called for.
Yeah, indeed. And there's always skeptics, right, of anything like this. So do you think, or is the notion that these new standards will satisfy the skeptics?
Yeah, I put that question to Justin Naroda, and here's what he said. He said the principles are kind of a start to this journey to satisfy skeptics and critics, but to fully address them, I think we're going to need more, and he does as well, more defined quantitative framework and processes for measuring and compliance with these principles. And that's really the only way we're going to get to an acceptable level of AI implementation. So it's also important to note, and this is interesting too, that the principles may not be applied to the same degree for all AI applications. Some applications of AI, particularly those kind of back-end process-oriented applications, are not as critical as others and probably won't require the same level of performance or scrutiny with regards to these principles to effectively execute their intended functions in an ethical manner. Whereas others, specifically kind of frontline operations applications, certainly will need a very high degree of compliance. And that's where bolstering these frameworks is going to be really, really important.
All right. I'm sure more to come on this, and obviously a great follow up, though, on the Department of Defense here and their efforts again to adopt these ethical AI standards. So, Greg, thank you for introducing and clarifying all those for us. I know we have a good bit of information on this, of course, on ZDNet. We hope you guys will all check it out there as well. And we appreciate you watching here today.